Hello there. Welcome to Drifting Off Learning Channel. You have arrived at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, and there is absolutely nothing you need to do right now except allow yourself to settle. Let the weight of the day begin to soften around you. Let the hours that have already passed simply drift backwards into the quiet distance, like the last fading light on a long horizon, gentle and unhurried. You do not need to hold on to anything tonight. You do not need to carry anything forward into this moment. Whatever thoughts are still circling, whatever tasks remain unresolved, whatever concerns were pressing against your attention just a little while ago, all of those things can be set down now, very gently, like placing a warm cup on a table and simply walking away from it, knowing it will still be there, knowing nothing will be lost. Allow your body to feel the surface beneath you, the weight of your limbs, the softness of the place where your head rests, the quiet warmth gathering around you as you settle deeper and deeper into stillness. Your breathing does not need to change on purpose. It will find its own slower rhythm when you stop asking anything of it. When you simply let it rise and fall the way the sea rises and falls against a quiet shore at midnight, with no one watching, with no ships in the harbor, with nothing but the slow and ancient conversation between water and land, between the pull of the moon and the resting world below. You are safe here. You are comfortable. The world outside can continue its turning without your assistance tonight. And it will, and everything will be exactly as it needs to be when morning comes. But morning is a long and gentle way away, and for now there is only this soft darkness, this comfortable stillness, and the very quiet, very unhurried sound of a voice that has nothing urgent to say. If you find yourself enjoying this space, this gentle channel that asks nothing of you, you are always welcome to return. A quiet like or subscribe when the moment feels natural is simply a warm gesture, like leaving a light on in the window, a small wordless signal that says this place was good to you, that you might like to find your way back here again someday. But there is no urgency in that, none at all, and for now the only invitation that matters is the one your body is already accepting. The invitation to rest, to release, to let the soft current of these words carry you slowly, slowly downward. There is something very old and very beautiful about the way the human mind finds comfort in repetition. This is one of the quietest truths about the way we are made, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, not to understand it quickly or completely, but simply to feel it, the way you might feel the warmth of sunlight on a windowsill, without needing to explain anything about the physics of light or the rotation of the earth. Some truths are felt before they are understood, and some are felt instead of understood, and both of those ways of knowing are perfectly right. The comfort of repetition is something that begins long before we are aware of it. It begins before memory, before language, before the kind of knowing that can be spoken. In the earliest days of a human life, long before there are words for anything at all, there is rhythm. The steady rhythm of a heartbeat heard from inside the warm dark, the rhythmic rise and fall of breath surrounding you, the slow and reliable pulse of a world that comes and goes and comes again. Before a single thought has been formed, before a single image has been stored, the nervous system is already learning that rhythm means safety, that repetition means continuation, that what has come before will come again, and that this, of all things, is deeply, fundamentally good. This knowledge does not disappear when we grow. It does not become less true simply because we have accumulated other kinds of knowing on top of it. It stays with us, down in the quietest, oldest layers of ourselves, as patient and as constant as the tides. And when we find ourselves in a state of rest, when the louder parts of the mind have grown quieter, and the protective vigilance that carries us through the day begins to loosen, those older, deeper layers are still there, still responding to the world in the ways they learned first, still finding comfort in what returns, still relaxing into what repeats. The word rhythm itself carries something of this quality. Say it very softly to yourself, if you like, or simply let it rest in the mind without saying it at all. Rhythm. And notice how the word seems to have its own gentle pulse, its own rise and fall, like something breathing. That quality is not an accident. Language, too, emerged from rhythm. The oldest human speech was almost certainly more sung than spoken, more felt in the body than processed in the mind. Before meaning, there was melody. Before the word, there was the sound of the word, warm in someone's throat, offered out into the air round a fire in the dark to the others gathered there. And the sound returned, and it was good. The brain, that extraordinary and quietly industrious organ resting inside your skull right now, processing nothing more demanding than the gentle drift of these words. The brain is built in a very fundamental way around the expectation of recurrence. It is not simply that the brain tolerates repetition. It is that the brain, at a very deep level, craves it. The neural structures that allow for prediction, for pattern recognition, for the quiet satisfaction of anticipating what comes next and being right. These are among the oldest and most basic features of the mind. They appear in animals who share very little else with us. They appear in creatures who will never think a single thought in the way we think thoughts, but who nonetheless find something that looks very much like ease in the familiar, and something that looks very much like relief when the world behaves the way it has behaved before. When a pattern completes itself, when the thing that was expected arrives as expected, there is a small and very quiet release of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Not the sharp, bright surge associated with excitement or reward, but a softer, lower signal, more like the settling of something that had been held at a slight angle finally coming to rest flat. It is a tiny whisper of rightness, a microscopic sigh of the nervous system. And when this happens again and again, as it does in sleep, as it does in meditation, as it does in the listening to soft and repetitive sounds, those tiny whispers accumulate into something larger, something that feels, from the inside, like peace. It is very easy in the ordinary hours of the day to forget that this is how we are made. The day asks so much of the mind. It asks for novelty, for response, for judgment, for the kind of alert and outward-facing attention that holds the world at arm's length, examining it, categorizing it, deciding how to act. All of that is useful. All of that is necessary. But it is tiring in a way that goes deeper than the muscles, deeper than the eyes, down into something that can only be restored by the opposite experience, by the experience of being inside a pattern rather than navigating an unknown, of knowing what comes next, of feeling the world arrange itself around a familiar shape. Sleep is, among many other things, a return to that state. It is the mind releasing its grip on novelty, on assessment, on the work of making sense of things. It is the slow dissolution of the waking self back into something older and simpler and more restful. And the path to sleep is often made smoother by anything that begins to invite that dissolution before it happens. soft sounds that repeat, gentle rhythms that the body recognizes, words that come at an unhurried pace and ask nothing, carry nothing sharp or demanding, simply arrive and pass like the gentle motion of branches in a very light wind. You may already be feeling something of that dissolving now. It is not something to resist or pursue. It simply happens, the way the light changes at evening without being asked to, the way the temperature of a room shifts gradually in the small hours without anyone adjusting anything. These things happen because conditions allow them to, and you have created those conditions now, with your stillness, with your willingness to let go. Somewhere in the long history of human beings living in the world, every culture that has ever existed has developed its own forms of repetitive sound for the purpose of calming and inducing sleep. Not because they read about the neuroscience of dopamine and prediction pathways, none of them did, but because they discovered, again and again, in different corners of the world, in different climates and different landscapes and different languages, that repetition soothes, that a slow and returning rhythm, heard in the dark, makes the nervous system quieter, that the lullaby works not because of the words, but because of the pattern of the words, the rise and fall, the way the melody comes back to itself, the way the sound of a loving voice saying nearly the same thing again and again and again dissolves the edges of wakefulness in the most ancient and reliable way imaginable. Every mother who has ever walked a restless child back and forth across a dark room, patting a soft back in slow and steady rhythm, was performing one of the oldest acts of human tenderness. And she was also, without knowing it, performing a neurological intervention as sophisticated as anything that modern sleep science has developed. More sophisticated, perhaps, because it arrives with warmth, with the smell of someone familiar, with the knowledge underneath all knowledge that you are held, that you are safe, that the rhythm being offered to you is being offered by someone who loves you. The nervous system responds to all of those things at once, and it quiets. There are places on earth where the natural world provides this same gift, without any human agency at all. Places where the sound environment is so consistently rhythmic, so gently and reliably repetitive, that simply being there induces a kind of physiological calm that no medicine quite replicates. The sound of a waterfall heard from a certain distance is one such place. Not the roar of something large and powerful, but the soft, continuous murmur of water moving over stones in a shallow river. A sound that does not change and does not stop, that has been making exactly that sound since long before any human ear was there to hear it, and will continue making it long after. To sit beside such a sound is to be wrapped in something that the nervous system recognizes as deeply, primally safe. Water moving, steady water, nothing chasing, nothing in danger, the world continuing its quiet work. The sound of wind in trees produces something similar, though with a slightly more complex texture. A texture that is still fundamentally repetitive, still following patterns that the deep mind recognizes, but with enough gentle variation to feel alive rather than mechanical. The trees near a body of water at night, if the wind is soft, produce a sound that has been compared to breathing, and the comparison is apt not only because of the rhythm, but because of what the rhythm implies. That something large and calm is breathing around you, that the world itself is breathing, that you are inside the breath of something that has been breathing for an unimaginable amount of time, and shows no sign of stopping. Rain is another such sound, and perhaps the most universally loved of all the natural rhythms that bring sleep. There is an entire category of sleep-inducing audio devoted to rain, to the sound of drops on leaves, on glass, on the surface of water, on the packed earth of a path through a forest. The reason rain works so well goes beyond the simple repetition of the sound itself, though that is part of it. Rain also brings with it a certain permission. When it rains, the ordinary expectations of the active world soften. Going outside becomes less obviously necessary. Motion becomes less expected. The world wraps itself in a gray and gentle curtain and says, "Rest, stay, there is nowhere to be." And something in the body responds to this with a loosening, a sinking down, a willingness to be horizontal that is one of the most delicious physical sensations available to a human being. The smell of rain, which has its own name, petrichor, from the Greek words for stone and the fluid that runs in the veins of the gods. This smell, too, triggers something ancient and restful. It is the smell of wet earth, of dust becoming mud, of things that were dry becoming soft and yielding. It is the smell of change happening slowly, the smell of patience, of the earth receiving what falls upon it without resistance. And there is something in that quality, the quality of receiving without resistance, that is exactly what the body and mind need in order to sleep. Not to push or pull or process or decide. Simply to receive. Simply to be present in the way that the earth is present when rain falls upon it, passively and perfectly, accepting everything that comes. The forests of the world, particularly those places where trees grow dense and tall, and the canopy is full, and the floor is soft with accumulated years of fallen leaves. These places have a quality of repetition that operates not in sound alone, but in the whole of the sensory environment. The pattern of light filtering through leaves, the repeated forms of trunk and branch and root, the smell of soil and bark and green life, the same basic smell repeating itself across hundreds of acres of living wood. To walk slowly through such a forest, or to sit very still in one, is to be surrounded by repetition in every direction, and the body knows exactly what to do with that. It quiets, it slows. The breath deepens without being asked. The shoulders drop without anyone deciding to lower them. This is not willpower at work. This is the oldest part of the nervous system doing what it has always known how to do, recognizing a safe pattern and releasing the tension that it had been holding against the possibility of something unsafe. The Japanese have a practice called Shinrin Yoku, which translates approximately as forest bathing, and though the name is lovely and the practice is ancient, the underlying mechanism is neither mystical nor complicated. It is simply the sustained experience of a repetitive, natural, non-threatening sensory environment, and the physiological response that this reliably produces. Blood pressure drops, cortisol levels fall, heart rate slows, the immune system becomes, in measurable ways, more active, and the quality of sleep that follows a period of time spent in this kind of environment is measurably deeper and more restorative than the sleep that follows a day spent in the fragmented, unpredictable, persistently novel sensory environment of modern life. None of which is to say anything negative about modern life, or about the extraordinary complexity and richness it offers. But it is to say that the body remembers an older kind of experience, carries the expectation of that experience somewhere deep in its architecture, and responds to its presence, even a small and approximate version of it, even the recorded sound of rain through a speaker in a quiet room, even the soft and repetitive sound of a voice describing gentle things, with something that is indistinguishable, at the level of the nervous system, from relief. The ocean, which covers more than two-thirds of the surface of this planet, and has been doing so for longer than there have been creatures with nervous systems to perceive it, operates on a rhythm that is at once enormously powerful and deeply, almost impossibly soothing. The waves come, the waves go. They have been coming and going since before the first fish swam in the ancient shallow seas, since before the first amphibian pulled itself, tentatively, onto a muddy bank and breathed air for the first time. The rhythm of waves is not one that was created for human beings, and yet human beings respond to it with a depth of ease that suggests something older than culture, older than species, older perhaps than the distinction between us and the sea from which we ultimately came. To lie on a beach and hear the waves, not thinking about the waves, not analyzing or admiring them, but simply receiving the sound as the body receives warmth. This is one of the most instinctively restorative experiences available to us. The interval between waves, the drawing back, the breath before the next arrival. This interval is close, on average, to the interval of a slow and comfortable human breath. Not exactly, not always, but close enough that the body often synchronizes with it, gently and without trying. The breath following the wave, following the breath in a loop that is too gradual and too quiet to be called conscious. But that is very much happening, very much a conversation between the body and the world. The moon drives the tides, and the tides drive the waves, and the moon has been in roughly its current relationship to the earth for approximately 4 billion years. 4 billion years is a number that resists real comprehension, but it can be approached from the side, the way you might approach something very bright by looking slightly away from it. 4 billion years ago, the earth itself was only recently formed. The oceans were young. The first simple life was just beginning to appear in the chemical warmth of the early seas. And already the moon was there, pulling the water back and forth, establishing the rhythm that would persist, uninterrupted, through all the vast, slow turning of geological time, through the formation and dissolution of continents, through the rise and fall of entire kingdoms of life, through extinctions and recoveries and radiations of new forms, through ice ages and warming periods and the long patient work of evolution, all while the waves kept coming in and going out, coming in and going out, as steady and as unconcerned as the breath of something that has no reason to hurry. There is something very calming about that kind of continuity, not because it is dramatic, it is not, but because it places the small concerns of a single human night in a context so large that they become, quite naturally, and without any effort, very small indeed, not insignificant. Nothing about you is insignificant, but small in the way that something held very far away becomes small, while remaining exactly what it is. Your worries exist. They are real. They belong to you and to your life. But they exist inside a night that exists inside a year, that exists inside a century, that exists inside the 4 billion years of a moon pulling water back and forth across the face of a patient world. And in that context, sleep is not an escape or an avoidance. It is simply the right thing that a small, warm creature does when the light goes away, and the rhythm of the world turns slow, and the body knows, in its oldest and most certain knowing, that it is safe enough to close its eyes. The study of sleep itself is a relatively young science, which is quietly remarkable when you consider that sleep is as old as complex life. We have been sleeping since long before we were human, and yet the systematic investigation of what sleep is, what it does, what happens inside the brain and body during those hours of apparent stillness, This investigation is barely 100 years old in any serious scientific form, and has yielded its most significant discoveries only in the last few decades. There is still a great deal that is not understood. Sleep remains, in many ways, one of the most beautiful mysteries of biology. What we do know is that sleep is not the absence of activity. It is not the brain turning off. It is not the body going quiet in the way a machine goes quiet when switched off. Sleep is, rather, a different kind of activity. In some respects, more active than waking. In some respects, more purposeful, more internally directed, more essential to the continuation of the living system than almost anything that happens in the waking hours. The sleeping brain is a working brain. It is consolidating memory, organizing experience, dissolving the chemical byproducts of the day's neural activity, repairing cellular structures, regulating hormone levels, modulating immune function, and processing emotional experience in ways that, without sleep, would accumulate into dysfunction. Sleep is not a luxury or an indulgence. It is maintenance. It is the overnight work of keeping a complex living system running well. And yet the path to sleep is not through effort. It is not through trying harder or being more disciplined or commanding the mind to stop its activity. It is, counterintuitively, through letting go of exactly that kind of direction. The more you try to fall asleep, the more you activate the attentive, effortful systems of the brain that are precisely what sleep requires you to suspend. Sleep comes when those systems receive permission to stand down. When the mind receives the signal that nothing is required right now, that the situation does not demand response, that it is safe to drift, to soften, to release the grip on waking consciousness and allow something slower and older and more automatic to take over. This is why repetition helps. Not because anything in a repetitive sound or a gentle rhythm directly causes unconsciousness, but because the mind, encountering a pattern that it can predict, that it can recognize, that contains nothing unexpected or requiring of active processing, gradually releases its attentive grip. There is nothing here to figure out. There is nothing here to respond to. There is no new information arriving, no decision to be made, no sudden change in the environment that requires assessment. Just the pattern. Just the same gentle thing, coming back again exactly as it was before. And the mind, finding nothing to do, begins very slowly to do nothing. Which is not nothing at all. It is the beginning of sleep. The word lullaby comes from roots meaning to sing to sleep, and versions of the lullaby exist in every human culture that has ever been documented. They vary enormously in their specific content, in the languages they use, in the melodies they employ, in the images they invoke. Some lullabies are explicitly about sleepiness, about the moon and stars and the coming of night. Others tell stories, though always slowly and without any urgency. Some are barely more than a repeated sound, a soft syllable sung over and over, not even aspiring to be a word, simply offering rhythm and warmth and the reassurance of a voice that is present and calm. But across all their variations, they share the fundamental structure: repetition, softness, a slow and reliable beat, the implicit message that the world is safe and that rest is good. The oldest preserved lullabies are several thousand years old, written on clay tablets in the ancient languages of Mesopotamia. They were written down because they were considered important enough to preserve, which tells you something about how central the practice was to the people who wrote them. The words have been translated, and they are remarkably familiar in their concern. A mother hoping her child will settle, will quiet, will allow sleep to come, describing the night as soft and the world as safe, and the rest that is coming as something to be welcomed. Thousands of years and thousands of miles from where you are lying now, and the essential human experience of accompanying a small creature into sleep was already so well understood that it had been written in careful marks on wet clay, and dried and kept. That continuity across human time is its own kind of rhythm. The repetition of experiences across generations, across centuries, across the vast span of recorded and unrecorded human life. The same soft songs sung by different mouths in different languages in different parts of the world, but always in the dark, always quietly, always with the same intention. The same movement of a hand across a small back, soothing by rhythm, soothing by the simple, reliable presence of touch. The same hope, the same tenderness, the same ancient human knowledge that rest is good, and that rest can be invited, that the path to sleep is paved not with urgency, but with gentleness, not with instruction, but with atmosphere. The nervous system of a human being maintains what researchers sometimes call a vigilance baseline, a general level of alertness that represents the minimum activation required by the brain to keep the body safe and responsive. This baseline is not anxiety, exactly. It is simply the ordinary hum of being a living creature in a world that sometimes presents threats. It is the system keeping one ear open, always, just in case. This baseline is remarkably responsive to the environment. In a space that is familiar, that contains recognized sounds and smells, that has not presented any threat for some time, the baseline naturally lowers. The one ear that was open relaxes its angle slightly. The monitoring that was happening below the level of consciousness begins to require less energy, less attention. And as it does, sleep becomes progressively easier to enter, because less of the mind's capacity is being devoted to the work of remaining alert. Familiar, repetitive sounds accelerate this lowering of the vigilance baseline. They do so by providing what researchers call sensory confirmation of safety, information that tells the monitoring systems of the brain that the environment is stable, predictable, and non-threatening. Every time a familiar pattern completes itself as expected, the wave comes in, the note returns, the voice continues in its unhurried way. That completion is read, somewhere below consciousness, as a small confirmation, still safe, still quiet. Nothing has changed. And each confirmation allows the vigilance baseline to lower by a tiny increment. And as it lowers and lowers, and keeps lowering through the continued presentation of safe and familiar pattern, sleep becomes not an effort to be achieved, but simply a threshold that is eventually, gently, inevitably crossed. The breath, which has been doing its own repetitive work this entire time without being asked, is one of the most available sources of this kind of calming signal. It is always there. It is always repeating. And it has the remarkable quality of being both entirely automatic. The body breathes whether the mind pays attention or not, and also available to gentle influence without effort or force, simply noticing the breath, not trying to change it, not counting it or controlling it, just resting attention on the sensation of it, tends to allow it to slow slightly and deepen slightly. This is not because attention is doing anything to the breath. It is because the breath, like many bodily processes, is sensitive to the state of the attention that accompanies it. An anxious mind tends toward a faster, shallower breath. A mind that is resting tends toward something slower. And Bringing gentle, non-demanding attention to the breath creates a kind of feedback loop in which the mind's noticing of the breath's movement contributes to the conditions that allow the breath to become slower, and the slower breath contributes to the conditions that allow the mind to quiet, and the quieter mind brings easier and more restful noticing of the breath, and so it continues, very gradually, very gently, in a direction that leads toward sleep. This is the soft paradox at the center of rest, that trying to achieve it tends to prevent it, while releasing the effort to achieve it tends to allow it. The mind that is trying to fall asleep is not a sleeping mind. It is an effortful, goal-directed, outcome-monitoring mind, which is nearly the opposite of what is needed. The mind that is simply resting in the present experience, in the sound of words or the sensation of breath or the warmth of comfortable stillness, with no particular destination, with no particular task, with nothing being measured and no progress being evaluated. That mind is already doing the thing. It is already in the condition from which sleep naturally arises. The way a seed that has been planted in good soil will naturally grow, not because it is trying, but because the conditions are right. Let the conditions be right now. They are right. You are warm and safe and horizontal, and the world is quiet. There is nothing to figure out and nothing to do. The breath is moving on its own, soft and steady and slow. The weight of the body is being held completely by the surface beneath it, which requires nothing from you, no effort of holding or balancing, just the pure ease of being supported. Every part of you that can let go is letting go, degree by degree, in the quiet way that things let go when there is no reason to hold on. The candles in a small room, if you have ever sat near them in the dark, the way the flame moves is not random, and yet it is not quite predictable either. It follows patterns within patterns, a fundamental rhythm of combustion and air that repeats itself at every moment, but with enough small variation to remain interesting without being demanding. The light it casts shifts softly, and the shadows it makes on a wall shift with it, and there is something in that shifting that is deeply compatible with the transition toward sleep, because it offers enough to rest the eyes on without offering anything sharp or fixed, or requiring of focused attention. Candlelight has accompanied human beings through every night of human existence in which artificial light of any kind was available at all, for hundreds of thousands of years, and the nervous system's response to it carries all of that history. Something in the brain recognizes firelight as good, as safe, as the sign of warmth and community, and the contained brightness that means the darkness is being held at bay, and rest can come. The stars are another ancient companion of sleep, visible on clear nights from the beginning of human consciousness, and likely from long before that, from the time before language when our ancestors sat or lay in the dark and looked up, and what they saw was not a mystery requiring solution, but a familiar pattern. The same pattern that had been there every clear night of every life they had ever known. The same arrangement of brightness in the dark, returning as it always returned, moving as it always moved, the slow wheel of the night sky turning overhead in its dependable and ancient way. There is comfort in that familiarity that is almost impossible to overstate. The stars are not just beautiful, they are consistent. They do not lie about what they are. They are the oldest reliable pattern in the human experience of the world, predating every other pattern we have ever learned to recognize, and they carry in their light something of that original and primal reassurance. The world is still here. The darkness is not empty. the pattern holds. You cannot see the stars right now, most likely, but they are there. On the other side of whatever roof is above you, on the other side of whatever clouds may be drifting in the atmosphere, the same stars that your ancestors looked at from the openings of their shelters on dark nights thousands of years ago are doing exactly what they have always done. They are burning. They are shining. They are holding their positions in the pattern that the people who came before you learned to navigate by, learned to tell time by, learned to dream under. And somewhere in the oldest part of you, in the part that carries the whole long history of what it has meant to be human and alive on this particular planet, there is a knowledge of those stars that does not require seeing them. A knowledge that is felt rather than thought, ancient rather than learned, quiet rather than spoken. The heartbeat is perhaps the most personal of all the rhythms that accompany a human life, because it is the one that has been present for the entire duration of that life, from the very first cell divisions in the early days of existence, before the heart itself was even formed, before there was anything recognizable as a body at all. And yet even in those earliest moments, before the embryonic heart began its first tentative contractions, there was already the sound of another heartbeat surrounding everything. The heartbeat of the mother, heard through the liquid warmth of the earliest environment. A sound so fundamental to the experience of being alive that it becomes part of what the brain expects the world to sound like. Part of the baseline of safety. Part of the original definition of home. This is why recordings of heartbeats are among the most reliable and widely used sleep aids for infants. Not because the infant is consciously recognizing the sound and thinking about what it means, but because the sound is registered somewhere far below consciousness in the most ancient part of the nervous system as the sound of safety. As the sound of being inside the right place, the warm place, the place where nothing bad happens. And that registration does not entirely disappear when we grow. It changes, it recedes into the background, it becomes less obviously necessary as other sources of safety become available. But it is still there, still responsive, still capable of producing its quiet signal of ease when a slow and steady rhythm is present in the environment. There is research suggesting that exposure to slow, rhythmic sounds with a pace similar to a resting heart rate, somewhere between 50 and 70 beats per minute, produces measurable decreases in anxiety and increases in the speed and ease of sleep onset. This pace is, of course, very close to the pace of a healthy resting heart, and it is also very close to the pace of a slow and comfortable walking step, and to the natural rhythm of a rocking chair, and to the tempo of the slowest and most peaceful traditional music from almost every culture in the world. These convergences are not coincidences. They reflect something built into the architecture of the human body, a preferred pace for the experience of safety, a rhythm that the entire system finds easiest to inhabit. Music has always known this, long before neuroscience arrived to explain it. The composers of lullabies, across cultures and centuries, arrived at approximately the same tempo not through scientific calculation, but through the direct feedback of experience. This pace works. At this pace, the small body in the arms begins to soften. At this pace, the breathing deepens, and the eyes grow heavy, and the grip of the tiny fist relaxes. And so the pace was kept, passed down, refined, never formalized into theory, but always preserved in practice, the way a great deal of the most important human knowledge is preserved. Not in books or institutions, but in the repeated doing of a thing, in the inherited gesture, in the song that is sung the same way by the grandmother that her grandmother sang it. The way that music moves through the body is itself a kind of repetition. Sound is vibration, and vibration is movement. And when sound enters the ear and is translated into neural signal and carried into the brain, the body does not simply process it cerebrally, the way it processes language or logical information. The body responds to music physically, in ways that are often invisible but are nonetheless real and measurable. The diaphragm subtly adjusts. The muscles of the face make tiny responses. The heartbeat shifts, however slightly, toward the tempo of what it hears. This is called entrainment, and it is one of the most remarkable features of how the body relates to sound. The tendency of biological rhythms to synchronize with external rhythmic patterns, particularly when those patterns are consistent and sustained. Entrainment is the mechanism behind much of the calming power of slow music, of the sound of rain, of the gentle voice speaking at an unhurried pace. The body literally tunes itself to what it hears. And when what it hears is slow and steady and non-threatening, the body's own rhythms, heart rate, breath rate, the oscillating patterns of neural activity in the brain, move in that direction. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually and genuinely. The body becomes, degree by degree, more like the sound it is receiving. More slow, more steady, more quiet. The alpha brain waves that characterize the state of relaxed wakefulness. The state that exists just before sleep. The state you may be in right now if your mind is soft and your body is heavy, and the words are arriving without requiring any effort to receive. These waves oscillate at between 8 and 12 cycles per second. They are the brain's signature of ease, of the releasing of active processing, of a mind that is present but not working, aware but not alert. They appear naturally in meditation, in daydreaming, in the kind of quiet absorption that happens when you sit near a fire or watch water or follow the movement of clouds. And they appear with particular ease and reliability in the transition toward sleep, as the brain releases its grip on waking consciousness and allows something slower and more inward to emerge. These waves can be encouraged, gently, indirectly, by creating the conditions in which they naturally arise, by reducing demands on active attention, by providing a sensory environment that is safe and familiar and repetitive, by allowing the body to be still and warm and horizontal, by offering the mind something soft and gentle to rest on, like the sound of a voice, so that it does not need to go searching for something to do. All of these things are happening now, and the alpha waves are, in their quiet way, arising and spreading, connecting distant regions of the brain in a slow and rhythmic conversation that is neither the sharp, efficient communication of active thought nor the deep, slow oscillations of deep sleep, but something in between, something transitional and peaceful and deeply, inherently comfortable. The sense of being between things, not quite awake, not quite asleep, in the soft borderland that researchers call the hypnagogic state, is one of the most interesting and least discussed aspects of the experience of sleep. In this state, the mind sometimes produces images, brief and gentle, that arrive without being summoned and dissolve before they can be examined. Colors that have no particular form. Landscapes that don't quite cohere but feel familiar and safe. Faces that are not anyone in particular, and yet somehow feel known. These images are not dreams exactly, though they are related to dreaming. They are more like the rough draft of dreams, the preliminary sketches made by a mind that is beginning to release its grip on the literal world and move toward the imagined one. People in the hypnagogic state sometimes hear sounds that aren't there. Soft music, voices speaking just below comprehension, the distant sound of wind. These are not hallucinations in any clinical sense. They are simply the mind's sensory processing systems beginning to generate their own input, the way they do during dreaming, before the full machinery of dream sleep has engaged. And they tend to feel, when people report them, not frightening but gentle, interesting even. A glimpse through a partly open door at something warm and strange and deeply familiar. The transition through this state and into deeper sleep is helped enormously by simply not fighting it, by meeting the strangeness with a kind of friendly neutrality, by receiving the images and sounds that arise in the hypnagogic state the way you might receive anything that floats past on a slow river, with interest but without grasping, watching it go, comfortable in the knowledge that you don't need to hold it or understand it, that it is simply part of the water. The seasons, like the tides and the days and the heartbeat, are a rhythm so large that it is easy not to perceive it as a rhythm at all, to experience it instead simply as the texture of time passing. But the seasons are a rhythm. Spring and summer and autumn and winter, coming back in the same order they have always come back, bringing the same qualities of light and temperature and smell, the same flowering and fading and resting and returning that have characterized the experience of life on this planet since there were seasons to speak of. And the body, which has evolved inside this rhythm for the entire span of its evolutionary existence, is deeply, physically synchronized with it. In winter, in the long dark, the body wants to sleep more, not because of laziness or lack of discipline, but because of biology. The short days reduce the amount of light received by the retinas, which signals the brain to produce more melatonin for longer periods of time, which shifts the body's experience of night toward something longer and more inclusive. The body in winter wants to do what animals who live in climates with true winters have always done. Slow down, move inward, conserve energy, rest deeply. It wants the kind of sleep that is less about completing a cycle and returning to activity, and more about dwelling in the quiet, the way a root dwells in the dark soil through the cold months, not dying, not inactive, but not reaching outward either, simply resting in the deep and patient dark, waiting for the warmth to return. There is a kind of sleep that happens in winter that has no equivalent in any other season. A heaviness, a depth, an ease of sinking that is somehow different from the sleep of warmer months. Not better or worse, simply different in quality, more interior, more inward-facing, the body wrapped around its own warmth, the world outside cold and dark, and the contrast between the outside and the inside making the inside feel more clearly, more definitely, more completely like home. Summer sleep is different. Lighter in the early hours when the world is still bright, warmer and more restless. But it has its own beauty, the particular pleasure of sleeping with a window open, with the sounds of summer nights coming in on a light breeze. Insects, in climates where there are summer insects, making their own rhythmic sounds in the darkness. The repetitive singing of creatures that have been making those sounds for hundreds of millions of years. The sound of crickets is older than almost any sound a human being is likely to hear. The ancestors of modern crickets were already singing in the forests of the Carboniferous period, 300 million years ago. And whatever they were communicating to each other, they were communicating it in the same essential way, by rubbing parts of themselves together and producing a rhythm, a pattern, a sound that repeats in the dark and announces presence, continuity, life going on in its ordinary and reliable way. The cicada, which sings even more insistently and at much greater volume, has a life cycle that is itself one of the most remarkable examples of biological repetition in the natural world. Some species of periodical cicada spend 17 years underground as nymphs, developing slowly in the dark soil, before emerging all at once, in enormous numbers, to sing and mate and die within a few weeks. 17 years. The same fixed period, repeated generation after generation, synchronized across entire populations spanning hundreds of miles. No individual cicada knows it is following a pattern. No individual cicada has any awareness of the 17-year cycle or its history or its extraordinary precision, and yet the pattern holds year after year, cycle after cycle, in a repetition so vast and so reliable that it is almost geological in its stability. There is something very peaceful about that, if you let yourself dwell on it gently. The pattern persisting without anyone choosing to maintain it. The rhythm continuing without anyone conducting it. The 17-year clock running inside millions of small bodies in the dark soil, keeping perfect time, not because they are trying to, but because that is simply what they are. Simply the structure they were born with, the pattern they carry inside them the way you carry the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Not as a decision, but as a fact of what you are. The monarch butterfly, which migrates from the forests of central Mexico to the Great Lakes region of North America and back each year. A journey of thousands of miles, accomplished by creatures that weigh less than a paperclip and live, in most cases, for only a few weeks. Follows a pattern that has been repeating for so long that no one knows when it began. No individual butterfly completes the round trip. The journey takes several generations. The butterflies that return in autumn to Mexico are the great-grandchildren of the butterflies that left in spring, navigating by the sun and by a magnetic sense, and by something that researchers have not yet fully understood, following a pattern encoded in their biology with a precision that human engineering would struggle to replicate. And they arrive, in the same forests, on the same trees, in the same quiet millions, as their ancestors did. The repetition of a pattern so large and so ancient that the individual creatures who carry it are barely aware of it, the way you are barely aware of the blood moving through your veins right now, going on doing its quiet work whether you think about it or not. The migration of birds, the flowering of certain plants that bloom only at night, the bioluminescence of certain deep-sea creatures that pulses in patterns that may serve functions we do not yet understand. The natural world is full of these repetitions, these patterns completing themselves and beginning again, layered on top of one another in a complexity that cannot be fully grasped, but that produces, when glimpsed partially, a feeling very much like the feeling you are settling into now. The feeling of being inside something very large and very old that knows what it is doing. Something that has been working for so long and with such reliability that trust is not even the right word for what it inspires. Because trust implies the possibility of doubt, and what the natural world's long repetitions inspire is something prior to doubt. A recognition, a memory that does not live in the mind but in the body. A knowing that comes not from learning, but from belonging. You belong to all of this, to the rhythm of the seasons and the tide and the heartbeat and the breath. to the pattern that began long before you were born and will continue long after, carrying in it something of every creature that has ever lived inside it. Every person who has ever felt the warmth of night air in summer and heard the distant sound of water and allowed themselves to let go. You carry all of that without knowing it. You are made of all of that without having decided to be. And it holds you now, gently and completely, the way a net of living light holds everything within it. Present, connected, supported, and perfectly, finally, still. The practice of meditation, which has been described and developed in so many different cultural contexts over so many thousands of years, that it might be considered one of humanity's most widely replicated discoveries, is fundamentally a practice of returning, not of achieving a state, but of returning to one, of returning again and again to the present moment, to the breath, to the sensation of being in a body, in a place, in a time, without judgment and without effort, and without the insistence that any of it be different from what it is. The meditator is not trying to think perfectly, or breathe perfectly, or feel perfectly. The meditator is simply returning. The moment the mind wanders, and it will wander, and this is not failure, this is the ordinary activity of a mind. The practice is simply to notice, without self-criticism, and to return, to the breath, to the present, to what is here. And what is most striking about this practice, when it is described in this simple way, is how closely it resembles the experience of being carried into sleep by a gentle, repetitive sound. In both cases, the mind is not asked to perform. It is not graded or corrected. It is simply offered something to return to, something soft and reliable and always present, something that will be there when the mind comes back from wherever it has wandered. The breath, the sound, the returning, and in the returning there is a quality of ease that accumulates, that deepens, that becomes, over time, and with repetition, the condition in which everything heavy can be set down, and everything tight can release, and the long, necessary, deeply restorative work of sleep can begin its quiet labor. The science of circadian rhythms, the internal biological clocks that regulate the timing of sleep and wakefulness, of hormone release, of cellular repair and metabolism, of the dozens of other bodily processes that are timed to the cycle of the day. This science reveals, more clearly than perhaps any other area of biology, just how deeply the human body is entrained to the patterns of the world around it. Every cell in the human body carries within it a tiny molecular clock, a set of proteins that interact with one another in a cycle that takes approximately 24 hours to complete. Every cell. Not just the neurons of the brain or the specialized cells of the retina that are sensitive to light. Every cell in the liver, in the heart, in the bone marrow and the skin and the lining of the intestines. All of them contain this small, ancient clockwork, ticking in their own molecular way, keeping their own time. This was discovered, in its modern molecular form, relatively recently, a discovery that earned the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2017. But the underlying phenomenon was suspected for much longer, and the biological clock itself is enormously ancient. The molecular mechanism that drives circadian rhythms in humans shares deep structural similarities with the molecular mechanisms that drive circadian rhythms in insects, in fish, in fungi. The same basic clock, conserved across hundreds of millions of years of evolution, running in the cells of creatures that are vastly different in every other respect. which suggests that the benefit of having an internal timing mechanism synchronized to the cycle of day and night is so fundamental to the functioning of complex life that once evolution stumbled upon it, it kept it, and kept it, and passed it down through every branch of the tree of life. The clock that runs in you is the same clock in its essential architecture that ran in the creatures that preceded you. It is older than your species. It is older than mammals. It is older than vertebrates. It is one of the most ancient and most conserved biological mechanisms in the living world, and it is running right now, in the dark, in every cell of your body, marking the time, signaling the hormones, preparing the tissues for the particular work of the night phase of its 24-hour cycle. This work includes the release of growth hormone, which in adults is associated not primarily with physical growth, but with cellular repair and recovery. It includes the consolidation of the day's learning into long-term memory, a process that is believed to require specific stages of sleep, and that cannot be easily replicated or replaced by any other state. It includes the clearing of metabolic waste from the brain through a system called the glymphatic system that appears to be primarily active during sleep, using cerebrospinal fluid to flush the spaces between neurons of the byproducts of neural activity that have accumulated during the day. The brain, during sleep, is essentially doing its own housekeeping, cleaning itself, preparing itself for tomorrow. There is something very satisfying and very restful about that image, if you allow it to land softly rather than analyzing it too closely. The brain, which has worked so hard all day, processing, deciding, worrying, remembering, creating, communicating, navigating, is now, in the quiet of the night, engaged in a different kind of work. The quiet work, the maintenance work, the work that cannot be done while the urgent demands of waking life are present, and that therefore must wait patiently for exactly this moment, for the stillness, for the dark, for the long, unhurried hours in which the day's clutter can be sorted and stored and swept away, and the system that carries you through the world can be refreshed and renewed and made ready for what comes next. You are being cared for right now by your own body in ways you cannot feel and do not need to direct. The cellular machinery is doing its quiet work. The hormones are moving through the bloodstream in their timed and purposeful way. The glymphatic system is beginning its nightly flushing, the cerebrospinal fluid moving softly through the spaces of the brain like a gentle tide through the channels of a marsh. All of this is happening without your involvement, without your direction, without your even being aware of it. And that is exactly right. That is what this time is for the body to do what it knows how to do, in the quiet, in the dark, while the part of you that spends its days managing and deciding and planning and worrying is finally, peacefully allowed to rest. The two primary types of sleep: rapid eye movement sleep, which is associated with vivid dreaming, and non-REM sleep, which is itself divided into several distinct stages of increasing depth, cycle through the night in a pattern that is itself a form of biological repetition. A full sleep cycle takes approximately 90 minutes to complete, and a full night's sleep typically includes 4 to 6 such cycles, each one moving through the stages in a characteristic order, a pattern that the sleeping brain enacts again and again through the hours of the night. The pattern is not perfectly identical on each repetition. The proportion of time spent in each stage shifts across the night, with deeper slow-wave sleep more common in the earlier cycles and REM sleep more prominent in the later ones. But the fundamental structure repeats. The architecture of the night is a loop, or rather a series of loops, each one slightly different but recognizably the same. The way the waves on a beach are all recognizably waves, even though no two are exactly identical. The REM sleep stage, in which the eyes move rapidly beneath closed lids and dreaming is most vivid and most narrative, is associated with the processing of emotional memory and the integration of new experiences with existing knowledge and understanding. It is during REM sleep that the brain seems to do some of its most creative work, making connections between things that were not obviously connected during waking, finding patterns in material that seemed unrelated, arriving at insights and solutions and unexpected combinations. The saying that one should sleep on a problem is not merely folk wisdom. It reflects a real feature of how the sleeping brain operates, that the particular kind of associative processing that characterizes REM sleep can do things with a problem that the focused, analytical waking mind cannot, and that a night of sleep can genuinely produce a kind of understanding that was not available the night before. This is part of why sleep protects creativity, not just because rest allows for better performance in the technical execution of creative tasks, though that is also true, but because the sleeping brain is itself a creative engine, working in its own way on its own schedule, making its own discoveries in the dark, and offering them back to the waking mind as gifts. A new idea, a resolved conflict, a sense of clarity about something that had been murky, a feeling of peace about something that had seemed troubling. These gifts are not always available in waking. They require the particular conditions of sleep to generate them. They require the repetitive cycling of the sleep architecture, the nightly return to REM sleep, the ongoing work of the dreaming mind. The dreams that arise in REM sleep are themselves a form of repetition, in the sense that the same themes, the same characters, the same emotional landscapes tend to recur across many nights and many years of dreaming. Every person who pays attention to their dreams over time will notice these recurrences. The place that appears again and again, slightly different in each dream but recognizable. The person or type of person who keeps showing up. The situation that keeps recurring in different variations, the emotional tone that seems to belong to the dream self as distinctly as a waking personality belongs to the waking self. Dream researchers call these recurring elements dream motifs, and they are common enough that they have been cataloged and discussed in every tradition that has taken dreams seriously, from the ancient world to the modern. These recurrences suggest that dreaming is not random, that the dreaming mind is working on something, returning to it again and again in different forms, trying different approaches, exploring different aspects of the same essential territory. Not because the dreamer is choosing to do this, but because the dreaming mind has its own interests, its own agenda, its own way of working through what needs to be worked through, and it does this through the same mechanism that makes repetition calming in waking life. The return to the familiar, the testing of the pattern, the gradual deepening of understanding that comes not from a single encounter, but from many accumulated over time in the quiet and private space of the sleeping mind. You do not need to think about any of this right now. You do not need to remember it, or understand it, or do anything with it. It is offered simply as the backdrop to your rest. The knowledge, soft and general, and requiring nothing, that what is happening to you right now as you rest is meaningful and purposeful and ancient and good. That the dark is not empty, but full of the body's quiet work. That the stillness you are settling into is the same stillness that has always preceded the deep and necessary repairs of sleep, in every human life that has ever been lived, across the full long span of human existence on this small and remarkable planet. There is a place in Iceland where the ground itself is warm. The geothermal energy that heats the interior of the earth comes so close to the surface there that the soil can be too warm to stand on comfortably, that hot springs bubble up through the rocks, that the air above certain patches of ground has a quality of heat and sulfur that makes the landscape feel alive in a geological sense, animate in a way that is not biological, but is nonetheless real and somehow very present. In such places, the Earth's own rhythm becomes tangible, the cycle of heating and cooling, of pressure and release, of energy moving through solid rock at speeds that are immeasurably slow by human standards, but that are, by the standards of geological time, perfectly ordinary. Geological time is another frame that quiets the mind, when held gently and without effort. The age of the Earth, approximately 4.5 billion years, is a duration so vast that it accommodates every pattern and rhythm that has ever occurred on the planet's surface, not once, but many times. Not many times, but thousands or millions of times. Mountain ranges have risen and been worn to plains. Oceans have opened and closed. Species have appeared and flourished and disappeared, and new ones have appeared in their place. Entire continents have drifted, moved by the same internal forces that warm the ground in Iceland, moved at the pace of a few centimeters per year, which sounds negligible, and over 4 billion years amounts to the complete rearrangement of every coastline on the planet. All of this is the Earth's own version of rhythm, of repetition at the largest possible scale. The tectonic cycle, which geologists sometimes describe as the Wilson cycle, describes the opening and closing of ocean basins over periods of hundreds of millions of years. The way a supercontinent breaks apart, and its pieces drift away from one another until they eventually, on the far side of deep time, come back together in a new configuration, only to break apart again. This cycle has repeated at least several times in Earth's history, and may repeat again in the deep future. It is a rhythm so slow that no creature could perceive it, and yet it is as real a rhythm as the heartbeat, following the same essential logic. A period of separation followed by a period of coming together, a dispersal followed by a gathering, an opening followed by a closing. The very atoms that make up your body have participated in many cycles before this one. The carbon atoms in your cells were forged in the cores of stars that lived and died billions of years before the sun was born. They were released into the cosmos when those stars exploded, dispersed across interstellar space, gathered again with the formation of the solar system, deposited on the early Earth, cycled through ocean chemistry and atmospheric chemistry and geological processes, incorporated into the first organic molecules, passed from organism to organism across the entire span of biological history, eaten and exhaled and absorbed and excreted and transformed across more generations of living things than can be conceived. And now they are here, in you, doing the particular work of being you, tonight, in this quiet room, in this comfortable dark, participating in yet another cycle among the uncountable cycles they have participated in before. Nothing in you is new at the level of atoms. Nothing in you has not been here before, in different arrangements, serving different purposes. You are a temporary and specific organization of material that is, at bottom, as old as the universe. And tonight, while you rest, that material will do what it has always done: cycle through its processes, maintain its patterns, restore what has been used, prepare what will be needed. The same basic chemistry that has always run the living world is running right now in the warm dark of your body, patient and purposeful and deeply familiar with its own work. The tides come in and go out. The stars wheel slowly overhead. The breath rises and falls. The heart keeps its quiet time. The cells of the body run their molecular clocks. The seasons prepare their slow turning toward morning. And you are held in all of it, weightlessly and completely, a small, warm point of consciousness inside an enormous and quietly reliable universe, resting. There are rivers in the world that have been flowing continuously for longer than any geologist has been able to date. Rivers whose courses have not changed in any fundamental way for hundreds of millions of years, that have been carving their channels through the same landscapes since before the dinosaurs existed, that have outlasted every species that has ever drunk from them, or built nests in the trees along their banks. The New River in North America, despite its misleading name, is believed to be among the oldest rivers in the world, possibly the second oldest after the Finke River in Australia, with a history that may extend back more than 300 million years. 300 million years of water flowing in the same direction through the same valley, making the same sounds over the same kinds of rocks, receiving the same rain and returning it eventually to the same sea. There is something about that continuity, the way a river just keeps going, has always just kept going, through all the changes of the world around it, through all the comings and goings of every creature that has ever paused on its banks, that induces a kind of reverence that has nothing sharp or demanding in it. It is the reverence of scale, of the recognition that the thing you are contemplating is simply too old and too continuous to be fully grasped, and that this ungraspability is itself a kind of invitation to stop grasping, to just be with the river, the way the river just is with whatever stands beside it, without agenda, without urgency, with nothing but the soft sound of water over stone, returning and returning and returning, as it has always done and will always do. The quality of water in a river is never precisely the same from one moment to the next. The water molecules that pass a given point are always different molecules, always new arrivals from some upstream source. And yet the river is always recognizably itself. The same width and depth and character, the same relationship to the rocks and banks and surrounding landscape, the same essential quality of riverness. The philosopher Heraclitus, who lived in the 5th century before the Common Era, said that you cannot step into the same river twice, because new waters are always flowing. And he was right, in the way that profound observations are right, pointing at something real and asking you to sit with its implications rather than resolve them. The river is always changing and always the same. The flame of a candle is always consuming new fuel and always appearing as a flame. The forest is always in the process of dying and becoming and always appearing as a forest. And you, in the small changes of a single human life, the cells that replace themselves, the memories that shift in the storing, the person you are becoming as you sleep and dream and wake and learn. You are always changing and always recognizably, unmistakably yourself. The same paradox, the same deep structure, the same pattern of continuity within change that is perhaps the most fundamental characteristic of living things. You are that. Not static, but continuous. Not fixed, but coherent. Not the same as you were, and not different from what you are. Simply yourself, in this moment, in this quiet, resting in the long current of a life that is always in motion and always, at its center, still. The slow wave sleep, which researchers also call deep sleep or N3, is the stage in which the brain produces its slowest, largest, most synchronized oscillations. The delta waves, which move at between 1 and 4 cycles per second, enormous and slow and deeply regular, sweeping across the cortex in gentle waves that bear more resemblance to the slow movement of ocean swells than to anything in ordinary waking experience. In this state, consciousness as we normally experience it is essentially absent. There is no dream, or very little. There is no awareness of the room, or the body, or the passage of time. There is simply the deep, slow oscillation of the resting brain, doing its most fundamental work. People who are roused from deep sleep often feel profoundly disoriented, unable to say where they are or what time it is, speaking slowly and with difficulty, moving through a fog that can take several minutes to clear. This disorientation is not a malfunction. It is simply the evidence of how far the brain has traveled from ordinary waking consciousness, how deeply it has descended into the slow and ancient rhythms of repair. The fog is the residue of that depth, a kind of temporal displacement, the mind not yet having reassembled its maps of the world, still somewhere between the slow oscillations of deep sleep and the sharp awareness of waking. But when you sink into deep sleep naturally, without being interrupted, the experience, to the extent that there is any experience at all, is simply one of not being there, of the absence of experience, of a gap in the continuity of consciousness that is, in retrospect, deeply restoring and completely untroubling. You go somewhere, in deep sleep, that is perhaps the closest thing to complete rest that a living brain can achieve. Not unconscious in the sense of impaired or damaged, but free, for a time, from the burden of being conscious. Free from the weight of being someone in particular, somewhere specific, worrying about particular things. Just the brain, doing its slow work in the dark, in a peace so complete that there is no one there to appreciate it. This place is waiting for you. It is not far. It is not difficult to reach. It requires nothing except the willingness to stop reaching, to stop directing, to let the body's own wisdom carry you there as it has carried you there every night of your life, as it will carry you there tonight, through the soft territory of the hypnagogic state, through the lighter stages of sleep, through the first cycling of the stages and into the deep, slow, beautifully quiet place where the delta waves move like ocean swells, and everything that needed to be held can finally, completely, be let go. The ritual of preparing for sleep is, for many people, one of the most reliable of all the repetitions that mark the shape of a day. The specific steps vary from person to person, from culture to culture, from one life stage to another. But the essential quality is the same. A series of actions performed in a consistent order, at a consistent time, that collectively signal to the body and nervous system that the day is ending and the night is beginning. The ritual is not the cause of sleep, but it is a powerful preparation for it, because it engages the deepest kind of learning, the learning that the body does about the world's reliable patterns, and it uses that learning to begin the physiological transition toward sleep before sleep itself arrives. The cup of warm liquid, the dimming of lights, the small adjustments to temperature and comfort, the lying down in a familiar position in a familiar place. These things, repeated night after night for months or years, become deeply associated in the nervous system with the state that follows them, so that simply performing them begins to invite that state, the way the smell of a certain food begins to produce saliva before the food has even been tasted. because the association between the smell and the eating has been made so many times that the body has learned to anticipate. The ritual says, "This is what comes before sleep," and the body, hearing this signal it has heard so many times before, begins to prepare. The consistent sleep environment, the same room, the same bed, the same sounds and temperatures and smells, is not simply a matter of preference or comfort, though it is that too. It is a form of environmental cueing, a way of using the body's powerful associative learning to make sleep easier to enter. The bedroom that is used only for sleep becomes, over time, a powerful trigger for the physiological state of sleep, because the associations between the environment and the state have been reinforced so many times. Darkness, a cool temperature, the familiar smell of bedding, the particular quality of quiet in a room where one has slept for many years. All of these things are read by the nervous system as sleep cues, and they do their work below consciousness, softly and reliably, every night. This is why the quality of the sleep environment matters as much as it does. Not because sleep is fragile or demanding, but because the body's deepest learning is associative, and the associations that have been built between a particular environment and the state of sleep are powerful resources that can either support or work against the ease of sleep depending on how they are managed. When the sleep environment is consistent, familiar, and associated with nothing except rest, it does a significant portion of the work of preparing for sleep simply by being present, simply by being the place that sleep has always happened, carrying in its walls and in its air and in the familiar weight of its darkness the accumulated memory of every night of rest that has ever occurred there. The bed itself is one of the most intimate of all human objects. A person who has slept in the same bed for many years has spent, by simple arithmetic, a third of their entire life in that space. More hours than in any other single location. More hours than in any chair or room or vehicle or outdoor space. The bed is the place of dreams and the deepest rest and the slow recovery from illness and the first and last hours of the day. It carries the warmth of the body that has rested there, the specific quality of the mattress that has conformed to the specific weight and shape of the specific person, the pillow that has absorbed the particular warmth of a particular head through thousands of nights. It is the most personal of places, and the most connected to rest, and simply lying in it is already, in some sense, the beginning of sleep. In the Old Norse world, beds were important enough to be given names and to be included in wills, passed from one generation to the next as significant possessions. The great beds of medieval Europe were elaborately made and considered among the most important furnishings in a household. Not simply because of their cost or craftsmanship, though those things were real, but because of what they represented: the place of legitimate rest, the sanctioned location for the vulnerable hours of unconsciousness, the safe harbor that the day's labor earned. To be put to bed with care and ceremony was to be honored. To provide a good bed was to provide one of the most fundamental of all human gifts: the conditions for proper rest. The darkness of the night, which is the oldest and most universal of all sleep cues, has its own history in the human relationship with sleep. Before the invention of artificial light, the transition from day to night was both sharper and more complete than it is in most modern environments. The sun went down and darkness arrived. Real darkness, the kind that cannot be fully experienced in most inhabited places today. A darkness so complete that even familiar landscapes became difficult to navigate by eye, in which the only lights were the fire, the candle, the moon, and the stars. In such darkness, the imperative toward rest was physical and absolute. There was very little to do in such darkness except sleep, or sit near a fire, or talk quietly in low light. And so sleep came more easily, perhaps, than it does in a world full of screens and streetlights, and the low persistent glow of a dozen small devices, because the environmental cue was so clear and so complete. There is something almost archaeological about turning off the lights before sleep in the modern world, a small recreation of the conditions under which human sleep originally evolved, a gesture toward the ancient darkness that the body still, in some part of itself, expects and recognizes. The darkness is not a deprivation, it is a signal older than language, older than the species, older than the kind of brain we carry in our skulls. It says, now, rest now. The day is done. The light is gone. The world is asking nothing more of you. And the body responds to this signal with a releasing, a lowering, a beginning of the long and necessary descent. Melatonin, the hormone of darkness, is produced by the pineal gland, a small structure deep in the center of the brain that was, in some of our evolutionary ancestors, actually a third eye, a photosensitive organ on the top of the skull that detected light and dark directly. In humans, that structure has become internal, buried in the brain, but it still performs its ancient function, detecting the absence of light and responding by releasing the hormone that signals to every cell in the body that night has come. Melatonin does not cause sleep directly. It is more like the announcement of night, a biochemical declaration that the conditions for sleep are now in place, that the systems and cycles associated with the night phase of the circadian rhythm can now begin their work. The pineal gland's sensitivity to light is one of the reasons that blue light, the kind emitted by screens, is particularly disruptive to the evening production of melatonin. Blue light mimics the spectral quality of daylight. When the pineal gland detects it, even late in the evening, it interprets the signal as morning rather than evening, and delays or suppresses the release of melatonin accordingly. The body, in a state of artificial day, does not begin its preparation for sleep. It waits for a darkness that the lights around it are insisting has not yet arrived. But in a dark room, with no screens, with the body lying still and warm and horizontal, the melatonin rises, as it has always risen when the conditions are right, rising slowly from the pineal gland into the bloodstream, moving through every system of the body, gently communicating the same message to every cell. Night. Night is here. The time for rest has come. All the systems that wait for night to do their particular work, the growth hormone release, the immune modulation, the cellular repair, the memory consolidation. All of these receive the same quiet signal and begin. The body's relationship with night, with darkness, with the signal of melatonin, and the whole cascade of physiological changes that follow it, is one of the most ancient and most essential relationships in the entire story of life. The circadian clock itself, as was mentioned earlier, predates complex animals. Some of the earliest organisms to possess a circadian clock were single-celled, living in the ancient seas, and for them the timing of the clock was likely related to the timing of DNA replication, the cellular copying of genetic information that needed to be protected from the intense ultraviolet radiation of the early sun, and that was therefore best done in darkness. The clock, from the very beginning, was a mechanism for distinguishing between light and dark and timing the most important activities of life accordingly. Day for one kind of work, night for another. the distinction ancient, the logic biological, the timing exact. In the quiet of the night, in the particular dark that exists between the setting of the sun and the rising of it again, something happens in the living world that is different from what happens in the day. Not better or worse, simply different. The diurnal animals rest, the nocturnal ones emerge. The chemistry of the atmosphere shifts slightly as the temperature falls. The ground cools and releases the heat it has been storing. The insects that sing by night take up their rhythmic calling. The flowers that attract nocturnal pollinators open, white against the dark, fragrant in ways that would be redundant in daylight when color can serve as signal. The whole of the natural world reorganizes itself around the fact of darkness, and this reorganization has been happening every night for so long that it is simply part of what night is, part of the definition of nighttime, the other half of the ancient alternation that gives the day its meaning. You are part of that alternation. One creature among the many that are resting now, in their various ways, in their various forms, across the surface of this sleeping side of the world. The birds are still on their branches or tucked in their roosts. The deer are lying down in the fields and the edges of forests. The fox is curled with its tail around its nose in whatever sheltered place it has found tonight. The bear, if it is winter, is deep in its den, in the long, slow metabolic quieting that carries it through the cold months. The whale, somewhere in the deep, dark ocean, is resting too, floating just below the surface or rising occasionally to breathe, its vast body supported by the water that has always held it. All of them resting, all of them carrying out the night's work in their own way. All of them part of the same enormous, ancient, continuous turning. And the trees, which do not sleep as animals sleep, but which nonetheless reduce their metabolic activity during the night hours, drawing down the water that moves through their vessels, resting the photosynthetic machinery of their leaves until morning, brings the light that puts it back to work. The trees are resting too. The great old trees that have seen hundreds of years of nights, that have been standing in their particular places through storms and droughts and the slow changes of climate, that have been doing this same alternation of day activity and night rest across all those years, with a patience and a continuity that makes the human experience of time feel very small and very sweet. There are trees alive today that were already old when some of the great historical events of the last millennium were occurring. The bristlecone pines of the White Mountains in California include individuals that are more than 4,000 years old. 4,000 years of days and nights. 4,000 years of the sun rising and setting over the same ridge, the same rocky soil, the same thin, high-altitude air. 4,000 cycles of the seasons. 4,000 winters survived, and 4,000 springs emerged from. The oldest of these trees was already more than 1,000 years old when the Egyptian pyramids were being built. It has continued its quiet alternation of day and night, of growing season and dormancy through the entire span of recorded human history, and is still doing it right now on a mountain in the western United States, surrounded by the other old trees that are its neighbors and companions, all of them resting in the night, all of them holding their ancient and patient stillness. There is a kindness in scale like this, a kindness in anything that places the restless, effortful, urgently significant concerns of a single human night against a backdrop large enough to allow them to breathe. This is not dismissal, not indifference. Nothing about your life is unimportant or small in the way that suggests it doesn't matter. But there is a difference between mattering and needing to be managed right now, tonight, in this comfortable dark. And most things that matter can wait for morning. Most things that seem urgent in the small hours are simply things that the daytime mind has not yet had the chance to address, and that will wait, with the same patience that everything larger than us has always exhibited, for the day when they can be properly met. Sleep is not postponement. Sleep is not avoidance. Sleep is the night's portion of the work, the portion that can only be done in darkness and in stillness, the portion that all the day's effort is partly in service of preparing for. When you sleep, you are not failing to be productive. You are being productive in the oldest and most essential way, maintaining the system that makes all other productivity possible, replenishing the resources that the day depleted, preparing the mind and body for another day of being fully, completely, generously alive in the world. Let that be enough for now. Let the permission of that be felt in the body, if it helps. The permission to rest, to not be working, to not be progressing toward anything in particular except the next phase of the night's cycle. The body knows what it is doing. The biology that has been running for billions of years knows what to do with this particular hour of this particular night. You do not need to help it. You only need to allow it, to stop insisting, to stop directing, to let the ancient competence of the living body do what it has always known how to do. In the dark, in the warmth, in the quiet, in the deep and patient night. The quality of trust that is required for sleep is one of the most interesting and least discussed requirements of being a living creature. Every night, every organism that sleeps makes itself more vulnerable than it is during waking, less responsive to the environment, less able to detect or respond to threats, less available for the ordinary work of survival. And yet sleep is not a choice that can be forgone indefinitely without catastrophic consequences. It is a necessity built so deeply into the architecture of life that the body will eventually force it, regardless of what the conscious mind prefers. The body insists on sleep because the body knows, in its biological way of knowing, that sleep is not a risk but a requirement. That the small additional vulnerability of the sleeping hours is outweighed, entirely and absolutely, by the gains in restoration, repair, and renewal that sleep provides. This biological trust, the trust that the sleeping body places in the safety of its environment every single night, is a form of faith so ordinary and so constant that we do not ordinarily think of it as faith at all. But it is. It is the most repeated act of trust that most human beings ever perform. More often than any other act, more reliably than any commitment or belief or relationship, the body extends its trust to the night, lays itself down, releases its vigilance, and accepts the vulnerability of unconsciousness. And most nights, and most lives, that trust is honored. The night passes. The sun comes back. The sleeper wakes, restored. Let the body extend that trust now. It already knows how. It has been doing it for as long as there has been a body to do it. There is nothing to learn, nothing to practice, nothing to get right. Simply the settling down, the letting go, the receiving of the dark and the warmth and the quiet as what they are, the conditions for rest, the right conditions, the ancient conditions, the conditions that everything in the biology of the living world has been oriented toward reaching again and again since the beginning of the cycle that is night. You are in those conditions now. You have always been in those conditions when they were present, and the body knows exactly what to do. very softly, very slowly. The thoughts that have been moving through the mind are beginning to lose their edges, not disappearing entirely. The mind does not simply switch off, but becoming less sharp, less urgent, less requiring of response. They become more like objects seen at a great distance, too far away to read or interact with. Simply present in the landscape of the mind without demanding anything. This is how sleep approaches. Not as an absence, but as a softening, a gradual rounding of the sharp edges of consciousness until the distinctions between thoughts blur and the river of the mind flows without any particular banks, without any particular direction, without any particular concern about where it is going. Let the softening happen. It is already happening. It happens every night in this same gradual way, a process that cannot be hurried and cannot be forced, but that can be welcomed, the way the tide is welcomed by the shore. Not with effort, not with preparation, but simply by being present and receptive, and by not getting in the way. The pattern of a quiet breathing person in a comfortable room, heard from nearby, is one of the most calming sounds that exists in the human auditory repertoire. It works whether or not you are consciously aware that it is working. It works even on people who have no idea that they are responding to it. The steady rise of the chest, the slow release of the exhale, the small pause at the bottom of the breath before the next inhalation begins. This pattern says everything that needs to be said about the safety of the immediate moment. Someone is here. Someone is calm. The world is quiet enough for this quality of breathing. Nothing is happening that requires alarm. Rest is permissible. Rest is what everyone present is doing, and it is right. Your own breathing is very much like this now. Whatever it was doing a little while ago, however fast or effortful it might have been earlier in the day, it has found in the quiet of this moment a pace closer to the pace of that imagined sleeping person nearby. Slower than it needs to be for activity, deeper than the breath of anxiety, softer at the edges, the transition between inhale and exhale less defined, more a gradual reversal than a sharp turn, the breath of a body that is beginning to rest. Notice it, if you like, not to control it, not to perfect it, simply to feel it, the way you would feel the warmth of the sun on skin, receiving a pleasant sensation, noting it, allowing it to be what it is. The breath is enough. It has always been enough. It will continue doing exactly what needs to be done long after your attention has moved elsewhere or nowhere. It does not need your attention, but it accepts it gently when offered, and in the acceptance something further softens. The very small sounds of a house or a room at night, the settling of walls as temperature changes, the faint sound of whatever ventilation is present, the distant, barely audible sounds of the outside world going about its quiet business. These small sounds, which might in other contexts go entirely unnoticed, become perceptible in the particular quality of attention that precedes sleep. Not because they have grown louder, but because the attention has grown quieter, and in the quieter attention, things previously masked by the noise of active mental life become gently apparent. The house breathing, the building doing its patient material work of holding its shape, the world continuing, nearby and soft. These sounds are not intrusive. They are companionable. They are the sounds of the living environment maintaining itself, doing the quiet, repetitive work that keeps everything in its right place, and they are entirely safe, and they have been accompanying human sleep since the first humans slept inside shelters of any kind. The creak of a branch, the settling of stone, the very faint vibration of wind against a wall. All of it the world's own lullaby, offered without intention or artistry, simply the background murmur of a material world continuing to be what it is. In certain traditions of meditation and contemplation, the practice of simply listening, not to any particular sound, not trying to identify or categorize what is heard, but simply opening the ears and allowing whatever sounds are present to pass through without comment. This practice is considered one of the most direct paths to the quality of quiet presence that underlies both deep meditation and natural sleep. When you listen without agenda, without the mental commentary that ordinarily accompanies listening, the act of listening becomes very restful. There is no effort in it. Sounds arrive and depart. The ears, which cannot be closed the way the eyes can be closed, simply receive. And in the receiving without processing, the mind finds a kind of ease that the more active forms of attention rarely provide. If you are listening to these words now without trying to remember them, without evaluating them, without comparing them to anything you have thought before, if the words are simply moving through your awareness like water through an open hand, received and released, then you are already practicing this quality of listening. The words themselves are not important. They are not carrying information that you will be tested on. They are not building toward a conclusion that you need to catch. They are simply here in the quiet, doing what sound does, arriving and moving and fading, each one exactly as significant and as transient as a single ripple in still water, spreading briefly and then gone, the water still and flat again, waiting for the next. The Japanese aesthetic concept of maya, which translates approximately as interval, gap, or negative space, encompasses something important about the relationship between sound and silence, between presence and absence, between the note and the space between notes. Ma is the pause in music that gives the sound its meaning. It is the empty space in a room that allows the objects within it to be seen. It is the silence between words that allows the words to be heard. It is the rest between breaths that gives the breath its rhythm. Without Ma, everything runs together into noise. With Ma, each element can be received fully, allowed its proper weight, and released before the next arrives. The practice of sleep is, in one way of thinking about it, the largest and most complete example of Ma in the human day. The long interval between the end of one day's activity and the beginning of the next. The negative space that makes the positive space of waking life coherent and sustainable. Without the Ma of sleep, the days would run into one another, undifferentiated, their distinctness eroded by the absence of the pause that defines them. With it, each day can be fully what it is, complete, finished, set aside, and the next can begin with the clarity that only comes from genuine rest. You are inside the Emma now, inside the interval. The day has ended, and the next has not yet begun, and in between them is this dark and quiet and warm space, this pause that is not empty but full of its own particular kind of activity, full of the body's ongoing work, full of the slow oscillations of the resting brain, full of the dreaming that will come, and the deep sleep that will follow, and the gradual return to waking that morning will bring. All of it happening inside the interval. All of it inside the MA. There are places on Earth where human beings have been sleeping for as long as humans have been present. the same caves and valley floors and sheltered coastlines and riverbanks where people have always found shelter and rest. Some of these places are layered with the accumulated residue of thousands of years of human occupation, the artifacts of sleeping and dreaming and waking stacked in the earth like the annual rings of a very old tree. Cooking fires and tools and ornaments and burials, and the traces of the ordinary daily lives of people who are now long gone, but who were, in their time, people with the same fundamental needs and the same basic biology, and the same ancient relationship with the dark and the night and the restorative mercy of sleep. To think of those people, not romantically or dramatically, but simply and gently. To think of a woman wrapped in skins lying near a banked fire in a cave 10,000 years ago, her children asleep around her, the sound of wind outside and the quiet breath of the others nearby, is to feel something of the depth of the human relationship with night. How long it has been going on. How many generations of this same basic experience, the lying down, the warming, the releasing, the sleeping, have preceded this moment. How many people have passed through this same threshold, from waking to rest, in this same gradual and natural way, guided by the same biological wisdom and the same ancient darkness. You are part of that line. You are another point in that long succession of nights. And the knowledge of that, held gently and without effort, can feel like a kind of company. Like knowing that you are lying down in a place where lying down has always been done, that the rest you are approaching has been approached by countless others, that there is nothing new or different or requiring special effort about what is happening right now. Simply the human experience of sleep, repeating itself as it has always repeated in the dark. The quality of the mind that is very close to sleep has been described in many ways by many people who have tried to capture it from the inside. Not dreaming yet, but no longer quite thinking. Aware, but not actively attending. Present, but not purposeful. The images that arise in this state, when they arise, are often surprising in their vividness. More saturated, somehow, than ordinary thought, more unexpected in their associations. A color that has no particular object. A landscape that is nowhere in particular, and somehow very familiar. A face that belongs to no one and is somehow known. These arrivals and departures are the mind's own version of what the breath is doing. In and out. In and out. Each one unique and each one part of the same continuing rhythm. The mind near sleep is not empty, but it is no longer insisting on anything. It is more like a large, slow-moving body of water than a rushing stream, deep and still on the surface, carrying whatever floats to it, releasing it when it drifts on, unattached to any of it, not trying to direct any of it, simply being the depth in which things can arise and dissolve without consequence. Be that depth now. There is no effort in it. You are already very nearly there. The body is heavy and warm. The breath is slow. The thoughts are soft and far away, the way lights are soft and far away across a dark body of water at night. Present but not requiring navigation. Beautiful but not demanding appreciation. Simply there, on the other side of a stillness that is very large and very comfortable. The weight of the eyelids, which is so familiar and so easy to accept when rest is near. This weight is not a failure of alertness, but a kindness of the body. The eyelid muscles, which have been working all day to hold the eyes in their positions, adjusting constantly to the demands of vision and attention and expression, are now releasing their effort, slowly and with relief. The eyes that have looked at so many things today, processed so much visual information, tracked so many movements and faces and texts and screens. Those eyes are resting now behind their closed lids, the visual cortex at the back of the brain growing quiet. The continuous flow of visual processing that characterizes every waking moment slowing and softening into something more internal, more self-generated, more like the preliminary images of dreaming than the sharp received images of waking vision. Somewhere in the brainstem, a region called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus is becoming more active, releasing inhibitory neurotransmitters that quiet the arousal systems of the brain, the systems responsible for wakefulness, for alertness, for the kind of active engagement with the world that the day required. These systems do not switch off all at once. They quiet gradually, each one releasing its hold incrementally, the way a hand releases an object not by an act of will, but by simply relaxing, by allowing the muscles to stop contracting, by letting go in the most basic and physiological sense of the phrase. You do not need to know any of this. You do not need to remember any of this. It is simply what is happening in the warm and quiet physiology of a body that is doing what it knows how to do. The brainstem is doing its work. The hypothalamus is doing its work. The thalamus is beginning to gate the sensory information that flows through it, closing the gates more fully with each passing minute, letting less through, turning the world outside down a little more, a little more, a little more. The sound of these words is becoming softer at the edges, perhaps, not because the voice is changing, but because the attention is. The part of the mind that has been listening is beginning to release its grip on the task of listening, and the words are arriving in a softer register, more like the sound of weather than the sound of language, more texture than meaning, more rhythm than content. This is right. This is the natural direction. There is no need to hold on to the words. They have done whatever work they were going to do. They are becoming background now, which is exactly what background is for. The spine is heavy against the mattress. Each vertebra is settling into the support beneath it, releasing the weight that it has been holding upright all day. The pelvis is sinking. The shoulders are sinking. The back of the skull is soft against the pillow. All the effort of posture, all the continuous muscular work of being upright in the world is no longer needed, and the muscles that have been doing that work are releasing it, lengthening very slightly as they let go, the body becoming more fully horizontal, more completely surrendered to gravity than it can ever be while standing or sitting. Gravity, which is so easy to take for granted, which is simply there, always, holding you to the earth with the same patience and consistency that it has always held everything to everything. Gravity is doing something kind right now. It is holding you down, not as constraint, but as embrace. The earth pulling gently at every part of you, holding you close, keeping you from floating away, keeping you in contact with the surface that is supporting you. There is something in that pull that is the oldest possible reassurance. You belong here. You are part of this. The earth knows you and holds you, and will not let you go. The moon, which is pulling the tides even now, exerts a gravitational force on you as well. Immeasurably small compared to the earth's pull, but real and continuous, and the same force that has been pulling the tides for 4 billion years. The same force that lights the dark with its reflected light on clear nights. The same force that has been companion to every sleeping human being who has ever seen moonlight through a window or lying in the open. The moon is there, right now, on its arc through the sky, doing its ancient and reliable work, indifferent to whether it is seen or felt or appreciated, simply present, simply itself, the way all the most reliable things in the world are simply themselves, without needing to be anything else. The stars beyond the moon are as they are. The galaxy is rotating, slowly, with the sun and all its planets moving around the galactic center at approximately 800,000 kilometers per hour, fast by any ordinary measure, and yet so vast the scale that this motion produces no sensation, no awareness, simply the slow completion of a circuit that takes 230 million years. The galaxy has not completed even one full rotation since the first dinosaurs appeared. The Earth is moving through space at speeds that cannot be felt, and in its moving, it is going somewhere that has always been its destination, in the pattern that has always been its orbit, in the way it has always moved. And none of it changes anything about the warmth of the bed, or the weight of the eyelids, or the softness of the breath. All of that motion, all of that vast and ancient activity, and here you are, in the warm dark, resting, a small warm point of consciousness in an enormous and moving universe, lying still for a few hours of the night. Neither small nor large in a way that requires judgment, simply here, simply at rest, simply in the place where the night has brought you and the body has been heading all day toward, the resting place, the natural end of the arc of the day, the place where everything that has been held can be set down, and everything that has been moving can slow, and everything that has been bright can dim, and everything that has been asking can simply, finally, stop asking. The last of the thoughts are very far away now. They are not important. They are not requiring anything. They are simply there, on the other side of a deepening quiet. And the quiet is larger than they are. And the quiet is growing. And the dark is soft. And the weight is good. And the breath is moving on its own. Slow and even and reliable, in and out, in and out. Nothing is needed. Nothing is missing. Everything that is here is enough, more than enough, exactly what is needed, exactly right. The pattern is continuing. The body is working. The night is doing what the night has always done. The rhythm of the world is underneath everything, steady as it has always been, steady as it will always be. A ground base, too low to hear, but felt in the bones and the blood and the ancient intelligent cells that carry the time in their smallest structures. Let the eyes be still. Let the hands be still. Let the thoughts be still, not by force, but by the simple exhaustion of their urgency. The way a wind goes still, not because it has been stopped, but because it has run the course of what was driving it, and there is nothing left to drive it further. Very gently, very slowly, very naturally. The way everything that lives has always found its way, at the end of its day, back to rest, back to the darkness, back to the quiet that is not absence but presence, not emptiness but the deepest kind of fullness. The fullness of a night that holds you, and a body that knows exactly what to do, and a world that will be there, unchanged in its essential goodness, when the morning comes to find you, rested, restored, and ready to begin again. Rest now. There is nothing more to hold, nothing more to carry, nothing more to understand or remember or do. The night is long, and quiet, and safe, and yours, and all of it is simply asking you to be in it. The way the ground is simply in the rain that falls on it. The way the shore is simply in the tide that finds it. the way every living thing that has ever been carried through the dark by the body's own ancient wisdom has been simply in the night, resting, still. The breath rises and falls. The heart keeps its quiet count. The stars hold their positions in the cold and beautiful dark above. The world continues, dependably and without drama, in the pattern it has always continued. And somewhere inside that enormous and reliable continuity, very small and very warm and very completely held, you are already, gently, beginning to be elsewhere, in the soft country between waking and sleep, where nothing asks anything of you and everything is very light, and the only sound is the sound of your own breathing, and even that is fading now, dissolving into the deeper quiet that is waiting beneath it, patient as it has always been, patient the way the earth is patient beneath the surface of everything, the way the dark is patient behind the light. Be there now. Be there. It is perfectly safe. It is perfectly good.